next guest is Laura Happe, author of If You Give an Ox an Oxy, a Paradoxy. Written by national expert on the opioid epidemic, Dr. Laura E. Happe, If You Give an Ox an Oxy, focuses on preventing opioid misuse for the next generation. Laura, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So, Laura, why did you write this book?
Great question. So If You Give an Ox an Oxy is an educational resource to teach teenagers about the dangers of abusing opioid prescriptions. I wrote this book for two reasons. First, I'm a mother. My husband and I have two children. Our son Candler is 13 and our daughter Eliza is 10. And we're concerned about them. And we actually buy books to talk to our kids about a variety of different topics that are difficult to talk about. We have books to talk about puberty, we have books to talk about internet safety, we have books to talk about bullying, but I realized that there wasn't really anything out there to talk to kids about the dangers of opioids. And as I started to dig a little bit deeper into that, I found a statistic that was really alarming. There was a survey that was done that showed that only 16% of parents are actually talking to their teenage kids about the dangers of abusing prescription opioids. So I really saw that there was a gap. Second, as a pharmacist, I was trained in the generation of pharmacists and of medical professionals where we were really over-prescribing and over-treating pain. We were treating pain very aggressively. And the origin of the opioid crisis is multifaceted, and the medical community really had a part of that. That was one part of this multifaceted cause. And so people often ask me, how can we correct the epidemic that we are in? How can we set the course right? And it will take a multifaceted approach. And so when I saw this gap, and I saw that I had a role to play to write a resource to fill this gap, to teach kids about the dangers of opioids, I felt like that I had an opportunity to just be one part of the solution.
Right, that early education piece is huge. So tell me more about how the children's book series inspired you to write this book.
Sure. So If You Give an Ox an Oxy is a parody of the children's book series, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, and there's a couple more books in the series. For example, If You Give a Moose a Muffin, If You Give a Pig a Pancake. I read these books to my kids when they were young, and as I got to kind of thinking about it, the storyline from these books really follows the storyline of addiction. It's cause and effect. And in each story, the character at the end goes back to the substance that they started with. So the mouse eats the cookie at the beginning of the book and goes back to it at the end. And that's a lot like the cycle of relapse and recovery with addiction. And so I decided to write this book to kind of follow that same storyline, and a storyline that teenagers would be familiar with because they heard the story when they were kids. And once I came up with the title, If You Give an Ox an Oxy, the book pretty much wrote itself. But I really also wanted to make the resource for teenagers that was approachable, lighthearted. You know, some of those books I mentioned earlier, when I sit down with my kids, I get the eye roll, right? And I wanted to make something that was just a little bit more fun to deal with a difficult topic.
So who is the audience for If You Give an Ox an Oxy?
Sure. So the age range, I think, is really fluid. It depends on the maturity level of your child. It depends on the circumstances, the environment which you live. But I generally recommend adolescents, middle school. The main thing is there's really not a wrong age to start talking to your kids about the risks of abusing drugs. The main point is we need to start talking. I want to change that statistic of only 16% of parents talking to their kids. It has to be 100%.
Right, and it's a lot of that, it will never happen to us.
Right.
Yeah. So for the viewers and readers at home, Laura, how can they stay connected to you?
Thanks. My website is www.laurahappe.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and if you want to connect with Ox, he's on Facebook at ifyougivanoxanoxy.com.
Thank you so much for your time,
Thank
and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.